But if the idea is you're going to find some patch of earth where it's going to be some sort of free utopia and you're going to escape the New World Order system, it is called the New World Order for a reason, I think, because it is a global plan for control.
Greetings, good people. Today, I'm joined by a guest who truly needs no introduction. His outspoken, narrative-driven style has been a major inspiration for my own videos. He has a rare talent for breaking down and connecting complex issues in a way that resonates with a wide audience. Officially, he calls himself an open source journalist, analyzing all available information and synthesizing it. But on a deeper level, he embodies the spirit of Thomas Paine's common sense, helping people think critically and reach their own conclusions. Please welcome James Corbett of the Corbett Report. Thank you for joining us today, James.
Thank you for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
James, when I first reached out for the interview over a month ago, I had no idea that you were about to publish a book. It's called Reportage: Essays on the New World Order. To start off, could you share where people can find it and, more importantly, what they can expect from it?
Excellent. Thank you for that. Yes, it is at reportagebook.com. And basically, you could buy it anywhere through any bookstore or anywhere that will order books. All you need is the ISBN number. So anywhere you can get books, you can get this book. Having said that, it is a book, as the title and subtitle might indicate, a book of essays, specifically 20 essays on a range of subjects that I think people who are familiar with my work at the Corbett Report will probably have some familiarity with: science, philosophy, history, geopolitics, etc. But I think I cover it in ways that I go into more depth than what I am able to do in the podcast format. So I've been working on this book for 15 years, if you can believe it, and have finally published it. And it is now out in the real world. So I'm very, very happy about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, James, if someone would have handed you this book right after 9/11, how do you think it would have changed your life decisions? Would you have moved to a different country, started down a different path, maybe even launched the Corbett Report in, say, 2002?
Yeah. It's funny. I've thought about that before because I kind of feel that I got to the game a bit late. I didn't actually start researching this stuff till 2006. And then I started the website in 2007. And I feel like, well, I could have started it earlier. I finished my undergrad degree in 2001 and my master's in 2003. Instead of wasting time in the workaday world, how come I wasn't doing this? And it's precisely because I was not handed a book like this or anything along these lines at that time. It wasn't until I came across this information that I started questioning anything. And so I often get that question from people: oh, why are you in Japan, James? As in, did you move there specifically because you knew you were going to be doing this kind of work and you wanted to avoid scrutiny from the authorities or something along those lines? And I can assure you that was the furthest thing from my mind at the time. I was just a young man looking for some adventure, some new place to go, earn a little money while seeing a different part of the world. Sounds good to me. Sign me up. I'll do that for a year and then I'll go back to Canada and continue my real life. And somehow along the way, I got stuck here. But, well, I won't say stuck. That sounds wrong, doesn't it? I found that this was my home. But having said that, yeah, what is the implication of living here while doing this work rather than, say, being back at home in Canada while doing this work? And I suppose, it's one of those things I can't really know, but I think it probably has affected my work on a number of levels, one of which is that it does provide me an arm's length remove from the situations that I'm covering. I'm often talking about American politics or Canadian politics or geopolitics, EU, etc. So I do get the sort of arm's length remove and the bird's eye view of these types of things where I'm not necessarily in the midst of them, which can be a good thing and a bad thing because I'm also not living the lived experience. I am a Canadian in paper only at this point. What does that even mean? I haven't lived there for 20 years. I'm disconnected from the reality of the average on-the-ground Canadian. So can I really speak from that perspective? These are all heady philosophical questions. But on another aspect of this, yes, I suppose there is some extent to which perhaps it is easier to do this work in a foreign country, especially a foreign country that speaks a foreign tongue that 99.9% of the public couldn't even understand my work, even if they somehow stumbled across my website. So I like to think I fly under the radar here, which perhaps is part of the appeal of doing this in a foreign country. But again, it was not part of the plan. I didn't think about that or plan it in that way in any way.
Mhm. Did you write this book as a resource for people to be awakened? Because a lot of people like myself, it was the COVID 1984 scamdemic that actually brought me to your reporting. But to an average reader, would this be one of those books where everything clicks together and they finally understand, oh, okay, this actually is something serious that we're marching into?
That would be the ideal, yes. At any rate, I certainly hope that it is an emissary to the world of my work in general. And I would hope that people who have no idea who James Corbett is or the Corbett Report and would never look at a website like that could read this book and start to understand aspects of at least my worldview and the way that I have pieced this information together that may be new and interesting to them, because it certainly consists of a lot of information I was never taught during my indoctrination in the public education system in Canada. Secondarily, yes, I like to think that this is particularly easily digestible work because I know that reading has certainly dropped in popularity in recent decades, shall we say. And so the prospect of reading a big, thick 350-page book is not on everyone's priority list. So having this broken up into a series of 20 essays that don't have to be read in any particular order and can be read singly does make it, I think, an easier approach for people. So I'd like to think it's actually quite easy for someone to just pick it up, take a look at the list of the titles, find one that they think sounds interesting and dive into it, and hopefully from there start to expand out. So I would like to think that this is a good tool for waking people up. Sure, absolutely. People who are not familiar with this information, especially because people do tend, I think, still to give a little bit more weight to printed material than they would to some guy ranting from his bedroom in Japan. Like, well, who the hell is this guy? But, a printed book has a little bit more weight physically as well as metaphorically.
You touched on such an important and interesting point because I've obviously been through a lot of your work, and you've spoken about your 7 years as a teacher in Japan in previous videos, where your position in the school naturally gave you authority in the eyes of the student. Now, however, as an independent journalist without the institutions backing you, and unfortunately after your YouTube channel was erased, you still manage to reach and persuade people. So what have you learned about communication that allows you to break this mental barrier of those who instinctively dismiss anything that doesn't come from official sources?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good and important question. And in fact, it goes to the heart of the way that you introduced me in this conversation. You said open source journalist. I think I've come to the conclusion that perhaps the better way of describing it is open source educator. I think to a certain extent, I still am a teacher. It's just a very different classroom in a different context in a different way. But I think fundamentally, that's still what I am doing. So the funny irony of all of this is that back when I was studying English literature for my undergrad and then Anglo-Irish literature for my master's degree, and people would inevitably ask me, so what are you going to do with that? My funny reply was always, I'm going to frame it. My slightly less funny reply was, I don't know, but I know I'm not going to be a teacher and I'm not going to be a journalist. And here we are, ha, 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 20 plus years later. And in some way, I think it is the combination of those things, because I think a really good journalist is someone who contextualizes information, and a really good teacher is someone who brings new information, but again, contextualizes it and presents it in a way that's understandable. And if I have any skills or abilities, I'd like to think it is in that realm of communicating, putting things in a sort of narrative framework that helps to make sense of the world for people. And to the extent that I can give people a more accurate map of reality, I think I will have done my job. Because that is the thing that I noticed and have developed over the decades of doing this research, is that, hey, I was given a map of reality when during, for example, in my indoctrination in the public education system and in my years growing up in society generally. And that map of reality was not a particularly accurate one. It didn't accurately explain what was happening or why certain things were happening. And I had numerous waypoints along the way to sort of check, am I more or less accurate with my map of reality now that I've awoken to this information, if we want to use that phrase.
Mhm.
And for example, one that sticks out in my memory was as I was encountering this information for the first time in 2006. I remember that was around the time of the US midterm elections. And it was right in the heart of that era of the Bush presidency and the war of terror, and all of that craziness was going on. And finally, the Democrats had swept the House and the Senate, right, at that time. And so there was a lot of excitement among so at least half of the US population, as to the possibility of, okay, now they're going to start, now that they've got the control of all of these congressional committees, they're going to start investigating war crimes and, putting Bush on trial and all of this. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, this is exciting. But then I was hearing all these crazy conspiracy theorists saying it's all a show. There are the two wings of the same bird of prey. Nothing is going to happen. And I thought, okay, here is a test. Do I have an accurate map of reality this way or that way? Which is more accurate? And the first thing that Nancy Pelosi came in as the new Speaker of the House to say was, "Oh, prosecution for war crimes is off the table. We're not even going to think about that." And I thought, oh, okay, so I see this is the more accurate map. And I've had numerous points along the way to test that. And I think one of the most dramatic occurred about 5 years ago when suddenly the world was locking down on the basis of this new incredible threat to human existence, as it was being portrayed at the time. And a lot of people were surprised by that. I was not surprised at all by anything that happened in that era, precisely because I had been studying this information for decades. And I had, for example, back in 2009, I had a podcast on medical martial law about all of the legal infrastructure that had already been laid for exactly what we saw taking place in 2020. So it didn't surprise me at all because I had a more accurate map of reality. So that to me is what I am trying to do, is to present that map to people and get them to understand it. So to that extent, perhaps, again, I am still a teacher fundamentally, and that's what I'm doing.
Well, coming on this point of a narrative, especially one that is given us from school, in Western societies, we're often taught that voting and democracy are core responsibilities, and we grow up with a certain trust in the system due to civics class, right? In contrast, in developing countries, rampant corruption can quickly shatter that illusion. So, as a self-described voluntarist, how did your Canadian education shape your views on government? And was there a specific moment when you let go of this belief in government's legitimacy, or was it a slow process?
Mm. Yeah, what's the old joke? What's the difference between a libertarian and an anarchist? It's about 6 months, if you're being honest. And for me, maybe it was more than 6 months. But yes, it was a process of coming to understand and really starting, because there is so much propaganda and conditioning and just sort of general worldview that has to be overcome as we start to interrogate and really get to the bottom of what are our assumptions, what do we really believe, why do we believe it. These are the types of questions that can become quite uncomfortable, because at a certain point you start questioning things that you've believed all your life and things that everyone around you believes. But I can't do that. It would tear down the fabric of society. So we have a lot of walls that have been built up around these types of fundamental questions that make it very uncomfortable for people, which is why I think there's very, very, very rarely will you have the experience of just simply imparting information to someone along these types of grand philosophical lines, and instantly they're like, oh, I see. Ah, yes, good point. Okay, now I'm an anarchist. That isn't how it generally works, because it, again, goes to a core part of our identity. So I think in terms of my growing up experience of this, there are many things that I could point to, for example, in my education. One example that resonates with me now was, I can't remember, perhaps it was high school or perhaps it was the introductory political philosophy course in university. At any rate, at some point, I remember the first time that I was reading John Locke and some of those ideas, it instantly resonated with me. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yes. Okay. Yes, people can do as they please as long as they are not interfering with other people's right to do as they please. Yeah. Okay. I mean, obviously, there's a lot to adjudicate there, but something fundamentally resonated with me about the morality of such a system. But of course, we live in this statist system where, of course, there is this political authority that comes from the will of the people as manifested in slips of paper in a ballot box, right? And so, whatever. Okay, that's the way the system works. And growing up in Canada, uh, I think most people are basically socialist by default. It's just what flavor of socialism. And so I was very much along those lines, and that was what defined my thinking politically for many years. And that was the way I originally was approaching. For example, when I first discovered podcasts and started listening, oh, I can listen to all this stuff, radio shows from around the world and what have you. I gravitated towards things from KPFA and these types of left-wing outlets talking about, the great progressive struggles and things like that. It wasn't until that I stumbled down the rabbit hole and I started listening to suddenly there was all these people from, for example, the American right wing who were agreeing with me on a lot of points. Like, for example, the dangers of a North American Union and the Security and Prosperity Partnership that was forming in the early 2000s. And suddenly it's these American right-wingers and Canadian progressives, and suddenly this left-right map of reality didn't make sense to me, so I had to start fundamentally questioning. And that's when I started to arrive at oh yeah, remember John Locke and those kinds of ideas and principles? Well, let's start examining that. And I started to realize, I think maybe I'm a libertarian. And so I tried that hat on for size for a while, but the more that I started to interrogate it, what is actually at the bottom of this? What is political authority? From whence does it derive? How do we actually, could it be possible? Could we have a society without threats of violence or extortion in order to force people to do things? And what would that look like? Again, there are answers to these questions that has been articulated many times. Well, this is how a free society could work, but that isn't fundamentally, I think, what people are really looking for. They're not looking for the detailed list of things that could be done in a free society. They're looking for that fundamental, but what happens when we get rid of daddy and mummy government? Because it is so fundamentally structured in our minds, I think, as the sort of the family writ large. It's the societal family, the national family, and there is a mummy government that will cradle you in the loving arms of the state, and there is daddy government that will come along and punish the bad guys. And it's very, very, very hard for most people to grow up politically and realize it's time to leave home and become responsible for ourselves. And that's a scary thing when you're doing it as a person growing up and leaving the family home. It's a scary thing when you're doing that politically as well. And I think that's what the hurdle that people have to get over. And a lot of people, I understand, just are not ready to make that move.
That's what John Taylor Gatto pointed out in his book, The Underground History of American Education. And on that point, actually, as a parent, James, have you noticed specific ways that governments subtly condition us to see taxation and government as virtuous and a civic duty? Because schools, media, even everyday interactions have this messaging. Funnily enough, when I'm editing my videos with my editing app, every stock clip of police officers have them with the thumbs up and the smiles and, everything is happy dandy. It's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't taken note of that, but that sounds about right. Of course, all the stock footage would be that kind of thing. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
it is interesting. Yeah. I guess as a parent, what I have noticed is right now, the big rage is the SDGs. And that is definitely being conditioned into children in Japanese society right now. SDGs. And that is just sort of this magical word that they put over everything. And that's the way that I think that people are being directed into your civic virtue and what you need to do as a good person, let alone as a Japanese citizen or whatever else, is to conform to whatever the SDGs are and to save the earth. And that is, of course, the way that this is packaged and sold. And interestingly enough, I had the conversation recently with my son, who's now 11 years old, and is I think has probably received this indoctrination his entire life at this point, right? Because the SDGs are about 10 years old anyway. And was having the conversation with him because he was talking about the SDGs that they were learning about at school, and I stopped to ask him, yeah, but have you read the Sustainable Development Goals, son? And he had to admit, well, no, no, but I know they're a good thing, right? Well, how do you know that? I think until you read what the actual details of what they're actually saying are, I don't think you can really know about that. And so at any rate, I implanted the idea in his head that isn't it strange that these people will fly in their private jets around the world to tell us that driving to work, for example, is killing the earth. By the way, side note, the most interesting example of that recently, in preparation for the upcoming COP30 in Brazil, the Conference of the Parties, the annual UN climate shindig, they are cutting a vast swath through the Amazon rainforest to provide the road that will access the town in which they're holding this COP30 conference, and all the people living along this swath of the Amazon that they're clear cutting are very upset about this, but who cares about that? We're having a climate conference. Anyway, that's the type of indoctrination that exists today. I think the taxation and political participation is just so taken for granted at this point. I don't think that's even really a push of the propaganda. That's just taken for granted. Everyone knows that. Now they're trying to direct it in a certain direction. Oh, it's to save the earth. You must live this way. I'm sure eating the bugs and other such things are being introduced. In fact, I remember a story from last year, I believe, about a high school in Japan somewhere that was talking about now they're going to be serving crickets as part of the school lunch, because now we're going to be eating bugs, to save the earth, to placate the weather gods. Anyway, that to me is, I think, the direction of the propaganda that exists right now, in terms of not just embracing the nation state, but now it's about embracing this broader idea of loving and saving the earth by essentially ceding all of our power to the UN and its oligarchs.
Yeah, yeah. Good old John Kerry, as usual, also with his private jets. So, James, once our audience reads your book, I imagine that they will have a knee-jerk reaction, which is get out of the West now, because that's where everything has happened, given that much of the New World Order agenda is being formulated there. And many, they've advocated buying land in developing countries, going off-grid, and escaping the so-called digital gulag. But based on your experience living in Japan, one of the most technologically advanced nations where digital control is a real concern, do you think that relocation is a viable solution, or are there challenges that this community might be overlooking?
Well, let's put it this way. I would not presume to tell people what they should or should not be doing in terms of moving elsewhere or anything along those lines. Those are personal decisions that have a multitude of factors that really could play into that. And for some people, it might be the right decision to move to another country. But I would certainly caution against sort of a utopian vision of I'm going to move to some country where everything will be free. And I do get emails along those lines from people from time to time, oh, I'm thinking about moving to whatever, name their country, Uruguay, because I hear it's a paradise or what have you. Okay, great. There are a lot of social and economic and other reasons that you might want to relocate to another place. But if the idea is you're going to find some patch of earth where it's going to be some sort of free utopia and you're going to escape the New World Order system, it is called the New World Order for a reason, I think, because it is a global plan for control. And I think some people's conception that, oh, well, yeah, but this technocratic digital management of everyone won't work in the third world where they don't even have, cell phones or what have you, is based on outdated conceptions of the way that things work and also unrealistic things. And a case in point would be, I think, the lockdowns and other technocratic measures of the scamdemic era, in which we saw it was a lot of these so-called, these places we could run to that lock down their citizens the hardest in South America and elsewhere. They were absolutely 100% on board with the agenda, and also enforcers of that agenda, sometimes in quite murderous ways, like in the Philippines, etc. So I would very much caution against a utopian idea that there's going to be some place to run to. But again, having said that, I don't know any person's personal situation, and all I know is I'm here in Japan, and my home is here, my family is here. This is now my home, and I am not going to turn tail and run to try to find some place where I can carve out a little bit of more freedom for myself. But no, I guess my children are screwed because the world's going to hell in a handbasket. It'll catch up with them eventually. I think at some point we do have to take a stand. And so I would, at the very least, for people who are thinking about it, sure, look into it, think about it, plan it, and be realistic about it. Because again, moving to another country, let alone another country that may not even speak your mother tongue, is a huge, huge deal. It's a big thing that a lot of people are not really prepared for or really capable of. So I would, at the very least, go into it with eyes wide open and really, really research what things before you go into it.
And you hit on a very important point, which is cultural integration, especially when it comes to our Western values such as free speech and individualism. In Japan, on the other hand, it has, I think, a more reserved social structure. After all, the famous proverb comes from there, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. And after living there for 20 years as a Westerner, James, how did you navigate this cultural dynamic, and did it impact the way that you built relationships?
It has to. I mean, there's no way you can avoid it. And it is one of those things where there are times, even to this day, there are times when I encounter things that just don't make sense to me as a Westerner. But what are you going to do if the entire society and everyone around you thinks it's normal? So yes, cultural integration. I'm not sure. Yeah, to what extent can you ever fully integrate? I don't know. I guess you can go native, as they say, and totally adopt all cultures and customs. But it seems unrealistic. At any rate, certainly at first, there is going to be culture shock. Absolutely, there will be, and it will affect all of your relationships, etc. Now, having said that, again, human beings are human beings, and that manifests itself in different ways in different social contexts. But fundamentally, you still get the same types of people doing the same types of things. It's just it takes on a different flavor here than it would back in the West, for example. So it's not that I think people are that there aren't individuals and creative people and people who want to color outside the lines, etc., that exist in Japan. It's just there are different ways of doing that and different ways of going around it. And there's kind of the cultural layer on top of that innate human nature. And the better, I guess, that you get at not manipulating, but maneuvering through the cultural layer to get to the human layer, I think that there are ways of doing that, and to express what it is you want to express within the context that you're within. But again, having said that, that is a huge process, and it can be extremely frustrating at times, and something that a lot of people might overlook if they haven't even visited a place, let alone tried to live in a place other than their home.
Right. Especially because in the West, we have this contractual nature, almost, especially in the United States. As long as you're providing a service to the community, I doubt very many people think, where are you from or what accent you speak. Meanwhile, from what I've heard, is that in Japan and elsewhere, it's far more about who do you know, and it's more community oriented. Was it helpful that you were an English teacher over there that gave you access to maybe a bit more relationships, that gave you a stepping stone to integrate a little bit more?
Yes, I suppose so. I that's something I've never really considered, but certainly the fact that I am a Western English speaker, which at least 20 years ago, maybe not so much anymore, but certainly was a prized thing for Japanese people who want to learn English, even if it's generally English ability is not very strong in Japan. But at the very least, the sort of the idea, well, I would like to visit the US or go work in Australia or something like that is a common dream for young people here. So the idea of, oh, okay, a Westerner who knows English, wow, that's a status privilege here to a certain extent. So that probably did help grease the skids for more social interaction, etc., and people wanting to communicate with me. It would be probably a very different experience for example, as there are more and more foreign workers who are being imported into Japan to try to make up the labor shortfall as a result of the demographic crunch. They tend to be Vietnamese, Thai, other East Asian and Southeast Asian people who come here who probably have a harder time integrating because they are not as highly prized on the social scale. Those are the types of factors you have to think about as well. And certainly, at any rate, I know it's funny because after 20 years of living here, I suppose my internal conception is I'm just kind of like everyone else and no one notices me. But no, every time I walk down the street, people will visibly identify, oh, that's the foreigner. And I know I will never, ever just be just a Japanese person. Like they'll never accept me as that. That's something I deal with. It doesn't particularly bother me, which is why I'm still here and happy for this to be my home. But it is certainly something that just is a reality.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting is you have mentioned a lot of times about building parallel societies as a solution to the New World Order. But in the West, we cherish individualism, and that often leads to weaker community ties because everybody is a friend on Facebook, but we don't focus on building deeper connections. And meanwhile, in the East, it is a little bit more community focused, at least in my experience, if not sometimes even collectivist, which naturally fosters this parallel society. Is there something that we can take from these countries and build something meaningful in the West without having to sacrifice this individual aspect? Or is there always going to be a trade-off?
I understand exactly what you are saying here, but I think it is based on the false premise, fundamentally, of individual versus society. And I think that is, to some extent, it's just a structure of our language and the way that we think about things, at least in English. The idea of individuality is contrasted with the idea of community or society. I think that's a false dichotomy, though. That is not the right way of looking at it. And I think that the integration of those concepts happens in the market, which is something that has been not only sort of forgotten, but actually actively denigrated amongst most of the population at this point. I think people have been trained through indoctrination systems and propaganda, etc., that the market, oh my God, oh, and capital and capitalism and oh, it's evil corporate bigwigs who are trying to control people. And we forget that the marketplace as it existed, say, a couple thousand years ago, say in Greece, the agora, was not a place of crass, just market transaction interaction. I'll give you this money for that, and haggling and bartering and trying to scam other people. The marketplace was the public square, the public place where you would go for all sorts of social interaction and to stand on the soapbox and deliver your speech and everything else. All of the interaction was taking place in that broader marketplace, including the transactions that were the way that you would live in society. I do this thing. I am a whatever, a blacksmith or whatever you are, and you bring your goods or you bring your services to the marketplace and you interact with people there. And your individuality is integrated into the whole of society because you bring something of value to other people that they want, and they will get that from you, and they will offer the things that their individuality bring to that, and you will, oh, I need that. And that's the way you integrate the individual into society. And that has been drummed out of us so completely that we now actively denigrate even the idea of the market, and it seems icky, and oh, we don't want business, and all of that is just bad. And no, we need society as some sort of collective kumbaya holding hands, and we all sing, and everyone shares everything, or all the time, or something like that. That's the conception that we have now. So I think if we could reorient our ideas, the problem is that now that we live so much of our lives in the digital matrix space, it makes that actual physical coming together in a marketplace, in society, to interact with other human beings less and less. I won't say possible. Of course it's possible, but it's just not even thinkable. Who would think about going into a physical place to interact with other human beings? No, I'm just going to sit in my pajamas and order things from Amazon. that is the marketplace at this point. And I understand why people might have negative conceptions about that. And it certainly does detach us from the fact that we are individuals bringing our individuality to a greater marketplace in order to participate in society and live with others. People we love, people we hate, people we don't know or don't care about, or in between, all of those people come together in the marketplace. And that's a good thing because, again, we bring what we have to the table, others bring what they have to the table. People offer things to society and they get rewarded for that. It's not individual versus society, it is how individuals integrate into society. So that's my perspective. I have no idea if that's a Western or Japanese, or I don't know if there's a nationality to that pertains to that. I guess we could go back to Greece and the Agora, but we don't necessarily have to do that. I think it's a better way of putting the lens on what is happening so that we can understand it in a different way.
Right, but that also at the end comes back down to education, where we've been taught basically to be these wage slaves who go in a factory and work for the master, and that obviously keeps us all into these boxes. We still have 10 minutes left, James, and I wanted to ask you specifically a question on Canadian geopolitics, since that's where you're from. And speaking of geopolitical power shifts, Trump has recently been barking about absorbing Canada into the United States. And I always found Canada geopolitically interesting because despite it being economically tied to the United States, it is closer oriented to the UK, even requiring the Prime Minister to swear an oath to the British monarch. Is there a real US strategy at play here, or is this just one of Trump's media frenzies to grab attention?
Yes. My initial inclination is to say that this is the latter. It is a media frenzy. It's at the very least a opening position in a greater bargaining situation where of course the point is not to actually integrate Canada as the 51st state. The point is to at the very least start people along the path that will lead to some deal on lumber for 2% less tariffs or whatever it is. But having said that, I think genuinely are entering a space of new world order positioning right now, where I think the verities of the past 80 years that have existed under the umbrella of Pax Americana, that existed in the new world order that was created post World War II, really is falling apart. It really is. We are going through a transition phase right now. So I guess perhaps there literally really could be some sort of drastic change in geopolitics that Canada, Greenland, Panama, whatever, take them all over. I don't know. I don't know how. I can't say. But my inclination, at any rate, is that no, this is not a serious geopolitical proposal. But having said that, it has been fascinating to me to watch the way people just have completely taken it on as a serious proposal and responded in that vein, to the extent that Canadians. I mean, I heard a story yesterday about now Canadians ordering an Americano at the coffee shop will now call it a Canadacano or something. Like, it's just it's interesting to behold how people's sense of identity can be formed in crisis moments like this, which obviously is a well-known part of human psychology that has been played on time and time again. It's the reason why false flag terrorism, for example, exists as a political strategy. Why on earth would the government attack itself? Precisely because it gets people to rally around that very same government, which may seem nonsensical when you see it from the bird's eye view, but from on the ground, we all saw what happened post 9/11. 97% approval rating or whatever it was for Bush. The person who had been reviled, absolutely reviled up to that point, suddenly becomes a hero and everyone rallies around them. So anyway, I think we're witnessing something like that. And it's particularly concerning to me as a Canadian because it is happening in Canada right now as we go through this weird transition period where, of course, Prime Minister Trudeau stepped down. So now we have Prime Minister Mark Carney, who has never been even selected for he's never even run for a position in Parliament or any other Canadian political position whatsoever. So he's a rogue maverick outsider, as he likes to paint himself, who started his career at Goldman Sachs. He has been at the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, the Bank for International Settlements, Bilderberg, RIIA, aka Chatham House, the UN Climate Finance Envoy, whatever they call that position. So he's the he's the ultimate globalist insider who is now portraying himself as a maverick outsider who, I think in any other era of Canadian political history, would have been just the lame duck prime minister during this transition period before the election is going to take place later this year. There's no doubt the Liberals would have been swept out of power in any other era, but just precisely right now, we're starting to see everyone rallying around the Canadian flag right now. And I think there's actually a chance, who knows, maybe Carney might pull this out of his hat and become the next prime minister. So it's a crazy, crazy, crazy time. And again, I cannot definitively say that there isn't some actual invasion plan. I don't have the sense yet that I think it's a serious proposal to really go after Canada, though.
Yeah, usually the loudest in the room is the weakest one. And I think you even mentioned in one of those videos that this may be the end of Pax Americana and the beginning of a multipolar world. After all, with the US now trying to supposedly grab Greenland, it could be trying to get the best parts of the Danish former empire before they wrap everything up. In that context, there is this growing belief that the BRICS is a real challenger to the US and NATO dominance. Some claim even that the R5, gold-backed currency, will reset the global financial system, even though it was literally created by the IMF board. Is this sound money argument valid, or is it just another carefully crafted illusion in a bigger chess game?
I always feel like I'm the parent who's telling children that actually Santa Claus isn't real. But yes, I hate to have to be the bearer of bad news, but somebody's got to tell it to you straight. Yes, I do not think that the BRICS multipolar world is truly is really going to be the savior of humanity. And it's interesting to have watched how that idea, that narrative, has been seeded into the independent media in the past couple of decades and propagated by a lot of people, to the extent where I suppose it's somewhat of a meme that anyone who disagrees with me is a Russian bot or something along those lines. But there are certainly people who, Canadians, Americans, etc., who seem to have more fealty to Putin and think that he's going to be some sort of savior. Or even some people, at least on the left side of the equation, the far left side, Xi and China, yeah, they're going to save humanity in some way. It's unfathomable to me from my political perspective, but I guess I can understand why people might be lured into thinking along those lines, because there certainly there is the bifurcation that is happening right now. We are seeing broadly the battle lines for a potential actual hot war, World War III. We're seeing what those battle lines would be and where they take place and the sort of fault lines. Although there is some, I guess, question now with the new Trump administration and Russia and what have you. But I think that the real World War III is US and China. I think that is what is being positioned, at the very least, as the Cold War of the 21st century, if not the hot war of the 21st century. And I think that's still very much on the table at the moment. And so people who are peripherally associated, Pakistan and other nations that could, India, for example, they could go with China, they could go with the US. There's a lot of that kind of tension that's taking place right now that we'll see resolved, I'm sure, in the coming years. Having said that, yes, the idea that the BRICS are going to save the world, create a new monetary paradigm, etc., I think is pie in the sky thinking. And we can look at that in many ways. I've talked, for example, about phony opposition, the truth about the BRICS, I wrote several years ago, in which I pointed out, for example, the BRICS New Development Bank was just basically all of the key figures were connected to the IMF World Bank system. They all had positions in that, and I went through some of the characters that populated those ranks and who they were and what their backgrounds were, and showing it's not really an alternative. Or, for example, China created the CIPS system, which I believe is the China Interbank Payment System, something along those lines, which was supposedly going to be a rival to the SWIFT system, the don't test me on that acronym. I'm not going to get that off the top of my head. But the SWIFT system is the international bank payment system that communicates bank transfer information internationally, and it's supposed to be a completely neutral system that anyone can use, any country can gain access to. It's not political in any way. It just happens to be based in Brussels, if memory serves correctly. But no, there's no political aspect to it until 2011, was it, when the U.S. Successfully lobbied and pressured SWIFT to delist Iranian banks. And so suddenly, people started to realize, this SWIFT system could be essentially a tool of geoeconomic warfare. So maybe we need an alternative. So China stepped up to the plate with the CIPS system. But the little niggly detail that they didn't tell you at the time was the CIPS system literally was using the SWIFT system as its infrastructure. It was literally renting essentially space on the SWIFT system to make its transactions. So there's so many aspects of these types of, it's totally a different system, guys, but it's actually the same system behind the scenes, that I think it should raise some alarms. And how about just the digital central bank digital currency paradigm? Is BRICS going to save us from that? Well, Russia is going very hard with the digital ruble, and they will be done, supposedly done with their testing later this year, and it's already rolling out in various ways. China is already essentially a digital currency that's tied into your WeChat profile and other things that are all controlled by the government. And so, for example, if you're jaywalking in the wrong place in China and the facial recognition camera catches you, it can literally in real time find you from your WeChat account where you hold your digital money. It will literally find you in real time. So by the time you actually cross the road, you'll have the message, you've just been fined, whatever, 51 or whatever it was. So absolute craziness in terms of thinking that this is truly going to be an actual alternative. As I say, the New World Order is called the New World Order for a reason, because it is about a global system of control. And my real worry is that we saw in the early 20th century the playing out of the old adage or the old observation that when you have a rising power that's coming into conflict with an established power, you were more likely than not going to have a war. And we saw that taking place as the rising Germany was meeting UK, and we saw World War I develop from that. And in the 21st century, we're seeing the rising China meeting the established US paradigm. And if there is a war that takes place as a result of that, what will happen? What happened after World War I? The creation of the League of Nations. What happened after World War II? The creation of the United Nations. What would happen after World War III? What plans have already been laid for some sort of more global structure with teeth that can actually really do things? What would the world order look like after World War III? That's why I'm particularly concerned about the way things are shaping up right now.
Well, on that note, to my audience, if you want to develop more of your geostrategic thinking, this is what James Corbett's website offers you. I would like to thank you for your time, James, but before we end, could you please tell the audience where are the best sites for them to find your work? And other than buying your book, are there any other ways to additionally support your work?
Thank you for that. Yes, I'm on Odyssey, Rumble, BitChute, archive.org, Substack. I have just been informed, I guess I'm not on Rockfin anymore. Apparently they don't want me on there. I don't know. Okay, whatever. But at any rate, I'm on a number of platforms, but the one place that I would hope if people are interested, they check out and at the very least bookmark would be corbettreport.com. That is my website on my servers from which you can download all of my work, MP3, MP4 files available for download. You can read my articles there. It's all there. So if I ever get scrubbed off of any platform like YouTube, like Rockfin, like Patreon, all of my work is still preserved at my site and on my servers. So bookmark corbettreport.com. And yes, I would never say this to anyone who's just encountering me for the first time. If it's the first time, just go in there and explore. I have literally thousands and thousands of hours of media completely for free for you to explore at your heart's desire, at your leisure. But if you do like my work and you have determined that I do good work and I've done it for a couple of decades now, and you would like to support it and see more of it in the future, then I would appreciate if people become members of the site, and they can do so for as little as $1 a month. Membership means that you get access to the weekly newsletter, although my editorial is always for free on Substack anyway, so there's not much to that. And you can comment on the website. But essentially, it's if you want to support my work, yeah, I would appreciate if people became a member.
Well, James, in any case, thank you very much for your insightful comments, and I really appreciate what you have done on your website. And for now, I wish you a fantastic week. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me on.
All right.